The big issue with drug development and biotech and pharma is the failure rate. The failure rate's too high, and the cost of developing drugs is enormous, right? A lot of people that don't know the industry, when I start talking to them about it, they're like, drugs cost so much. Why is that? And I'm like, it's because you're not just paying for that one drug, you're paying for all the failures. And if you think about kind of like at an early stage, projects have maybe like 1% chance of being successful, even less than that, if you're at a discovery phase. The hope of technology is that if we can move that 1% to 2 or 3 or 4%, it's going to have a huge impact. I think there are so many interesting areas to be thinking about kind of like moving that needle.
Welcome back to Tank Talks. I'm your host, Matt Cohen. And on today's episode, we have a very special and emotional one. Originally, we recorded this episode with Roberto Bellini on July 3rd, just 2 weeks before the sudden passing of his father, Dr. Francesco Bellini, a true giant of Canadian biotech. But after the news broke, Roberto and I decided to sit back down and re-record this episode, not just to reflect on his own journey, but to honor the life and legacy of his father. For those who may not know, Francesco Bellini was more than a pioneering entrepreneur. He was the architect of Canada's biotech sector. As the co-founder of Biochem Pharma, he helped develop the 3TC molecule, a critical breakthrough in the treatment of HIV/AIDS, and later sold the company in what is still considered one of the most iconic biotech deals in Canadian history. He was affectionately referred to as Mr. Biotech Canada, or Dr. B to some. But as Roberto shares, behind the legendary deals and scientific breakthroughs, Francesco was also a devoted father, one who pushed hard, led boldly, and left room for his sons to carve their own paths. In this episode, Roberto opens up about the emotional journey of working alongside his father, the pressure of carrying a family legacy, and the near collapse and miraculous turnaround of Bellus Health, a company they built together and eventually sold to GSK for $2 billion. This is a raw and honest conversation about biotech, resilience, reinvention, and the kind of leadership that lasts well beyond the lab. Now let's jump into the tank for this week's episode with Roberto Bellini from BSQUARED Capital. Thanks for joining us in the tank today, Roberto.
It's my pleasure to be here, Matt. Super excited.
It's awesome to have you in the tank today, Roberto. We've known each other for a little bit now, and this is obviously going to be a conversation that we're having unfortunately, after the time of with your father, your late father, Francesco Bellini, had passed recently. And I know that you and I have had times to chat about this off the record, but, I want to spend a little bit of time thinking about, your life and how you grew up underneath your father and your family's biotech legacy. Obviously you said it was both a privilege and a challenge at times. And I know how much you and your family, kind of revolved around your father's life. A lot of the times he was a mentor, he was a role model, and the impact he had across the bigger biotech industry at large in Canada, around the world, obviously speaks volumes. But maybe for some of our listeners who never really knew your father or all the accomplishments he had, can you share a bit about his background and your background and kind of what it was like growing up in your family?
Yeah, for sure. I'm happy to do that. And I think this is great. This is the first time I really get to speak after my dad passed away unexpectedly this summer. And I've had the chance to since then I've had a lot of chance to think and reflect on his life and my life and how I got here. And so I think this is going to be a great conversation to have. To start it off, I think it makes sense to kind of take a step back and think about my dad. His life is crazy. It's that life that you read about in books. He came to Canada in his early 20s, without any money at all, as a complete immigrant. His parents had moved here earlier because they were farmers in Italy, and there was no way of making ends meet in Italy, kind of in the post-World War II setting. And he did his PhD at University of New Brunswick, and eventually kind of did a couple of jobs, was doing lab work. He was first a lab technician, then headed a lab. And then there was a super interesting program in Quebec in the mid-1980s where they were helping companies go public. And they were essentially giving tax credits that would pay back 80% of the money that people would invest in these public companies. And there were some consultants that came to see the institute that my dad was working at. And he had been making some fine chemicals and selling them to other labs. And they were like, hey, here's a business. and we're going to take this lab and we're going to spin it out into a company. Could you imagine? He had no formal business training. He was a PhD chemist heading a lab. They put him in front of cameras. They raised, I think, $8 million. And boom, here he was as a public company in the mid 1980s. And he'll tell you the story. The story is like everything that they put in the prospectus at that time didn't work. But this was in the heyday of biotech, or heyday. It was the beginning of biotech. And my dad maybe didn't have any formal business training, but he had a ton of street smarts. And he went out and did a number of different deals with different universities, bought companies, bought technologies. And he was a visionary I kind of consider him like an absolute genius. Like, he saw things before other people saw them. He heavily invested in research for HIV when HIV, was an emerging condition that was affecting a growing number of people, but many pharmaceutical companies did not want to get involved in that business. And eventually the company discovered one of the most important products for the treatment of HIV that continues to this day. And that's what he's best known for, but he was a visionary in so many other ways. I'll give you another example. He was one of the first ones to invest in vaccine manufacturing here in Canada and created a lot of the supply that we actually still currently use in Canada, and obviously extremely valuable when he invested in those when vaccines weren't cool, right? So that's kind of like from the business side. I do want to say he had an incredible energy, and there've been so many stories over the last couple of months of people telling me about how he's interacted with them and how he drove their careers. And when you met him, you could tell that he loved biotech. He loved doing drug development. He loved helping people. He loved bringing drugs to unmet, to kind of like cure people and achieve unmet medical needs. And it was infectious. Like, he got people on board, and that was an incredible skill set that he had. And I think that's the bridge to both my brother and I. There's no, it's kind of like both, like we're only two boys in the family, and we grew up with that, right? Like, it was all around us, and my dad didn't really kind of think about like work and life and like personal and separate those things. It was kind of like all together. My brother and I would attend the AGMs. He would talk about business at the dinner table.
What were your earliest recollections of like his time sharing what his business was about? Like, were you like 6, 7, 8 years old with you and your brother sitting around the table, really understanding, obviously not the science, but like the impact he was having?
He founded Biochem in 1986. I was 6 years old. My brother was 2 years old, right? I think it really started. It was always there. Like, it wasn't like my early recollections are of him on the weekend putting up slideshows. Like, back in the day when you had those like big roller things and you had to like put one slide in at a time. And he'd be like going through them, and he'd be like showing us some data that they had generated, and stuff like that.
He would do like a full like pre-pitch at home to prepare for the next day's meeting.
I don't know about full pitch, but like, he just always wanted to share,
Very cool.
And it was both on the science side and on the business side. And he would invite us to dinners with, like his friends, but like his friends were kind of like investors in the company. There was this overlapping, kind of element between business and personal. And all they do would be talking about business. And then all of a sudden they like, he'd look over at me or my brother and be like, "Hey, what do you think about this?" And I'd be like, "Oh, okay. My opinion is interesting. Or all right." And I think it kind of engaged you, right? So there's no surprise now that my brother and I are now, we're biotech entrepreneurs and ran companies, and now we invest in biotech.
The Biochem Pharma at the time was one of the largest acquisitions ever in biotech in Canada, right?
I still think to this day, it's probably the largest. It's a $6 billion exit, and it was a $6 billion exit in, 2000. which my dad was also very competitive and sometimes even with his sons. And he made it clear to us that like, that was the biggest exit. And he was like the biggest dog in the room, kind of thing.
I love it. That's fantastic. But so you obviously, the journey for you stepping out, I guess, aside from your dad's, work, started when you built your own leadership role at a company called Bellus. Can you tell our listeners a bit about how that kind of came to be? Because your dad was a part of it as well, but there was obviously a lot of changes that happened at the company during its evolution, and your role evolved eventually to become CEO. Can you explain a little bit about the Bellus journey and how that kind of helped you step out from behind your dad's shadow?
I think it's important to note a little bit that, I graduated with a biochemistry degree. My dad had just sold his company. He set up a family office that was investing in the space. So I started out as an investor, as an analyst, right? Super junior. That's how kind of like I learned the ropes. And then moved into more operational roles like project management, BD, assistant to the CEO, and realized that I love being at the operational level. That's how I ended up at Bellus and being the CEO. I was actually working in business development at Bellus. The company was going through a lot of changes, and the lead program failed. And the program that I was responsible for became the lead program. There was a management change that was being planned. The CFO who was supposed to be taken over decided to leave and didn't want the job anymore. And the company was just in a tough spot. The market cap was like 15 million. This is a public company. They didn't have a lot of options. And I think that that's why they turned to me. I probably was like just too naive to realize, and had always wanted to be a CEO. So I kind of they were like, do you want to do this? And I was like, yeah, I want to do it. But I was a 30-year-old CEO, first-time CEO in a public company. So didn't really fully appreciate the challenges that were ahead of me.
So when the phase 3 trial of Kayacta failed in 2016, Bellus was, I believe, down to 9 employees and $8 million in cash. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
What happened? What happened on that day? And what do you reflect on in terms of how you kind of picked yourself up and moved on?
Yeah. So the first project we ran at Bellus was over about a 7-year period. It was a phase 3 study for a rare kidney disease called AA amyloidosis. We financed that project. I said earlier, the market cap of the company when I started was 10, 15 million. We grew that market cap to about 325 million as we went into kind of like the data readout. And the study was negative. It was something that we thought was super promising, that we thought of it had a high chance of being successful, and it failed. And I think sometimes a lot of entrepreneurs get into biotech and run studies, and you always think that your project is going to work, okay? Against all odds, right? Because the thing is, when you look at the actual empirical evidence, many, many programs fail. The odds of success are quite low. And I was just like all those young entrepreneurs. I thought I was going to be successful, and I ended up, we ended up failing, and it hit me really, really, really hard. I really questioned what I was doing in the industry at that point, for sure.
This might be a basic question, but for people who don't understand how the timeline works out for when a failure is recognized by the company and when the board and the founder or CEOs have to announce it to the public, can you walk us through that time frame? Do you get an update from the lab or something the night before, be like, okay, we failed, and then we have to announce it tomorrow morning before the market opens? How does that timeline actually work?
I think this is such an interesting question, and I find it's crazy, particularly in public companies, right? And so in most circumstances, when we're talking about kind of the most important key data points around clinical trials, so you're running these clinical trials, they're blinded. You don't know the data, right? So you have patients on placebo, you have patients on drug, and over the course of the study, you might be seeing some improvements or some deteriorations in whatever kind of indicator you're looking at, but you don't know if that's on placebo or on drug. Typically, what a company will do is over the course of a weekend, so on a Friday, they'll unblind the study. And you'll get all this data on that Friday. And you'll see in that moment, and your plan is to release data on Monday morning to the public in a public company. So over the course of a weekend, you need to understand, sift this data, and kind of come up with like the right messaging. And when things are clean, when it's like either black and you failed and it's obvious that you failed, that's pretty straightforward. And if it's, if it's white and you succeeded and you hit all your kind of like efficacy endpoints that you were looking for and the drug's safe, that's also pretty straightforward because you do scenario planning ahead of time. But a lot of times the data's gray. There's some things that are positive, some things that are maybe a little bit negative, and crafting the right message around that can be very tricky over such a short time period.
So what happens? Like you just get into a war room basically and start like with phase 3 for Kayakta, it failed. So it was black?
Yeah, that one failed and it was super straight.
Okay.
It obviously failed and it was like really like, and it's tough. You have tough conversations, right? You get your board together and you're like, hey guys, like we didn't make it. Like and then, there's questions around, well, was it this? Was it this? But in this case, it was very, very clear that there was, that it was not working. But this is a good segue. And we might get there later if you want, Matt, but we had our first, in our kind of the second iteration, the second phase, Bellus 2.0 was a cough project.
Right.
And that one, the first trial was gray.
Yeah.
And it was a very intense weekend to kind of reposition that program for the Monday morning investor call.
Okay, so let's talk about the moment you found the chronic cough molecule, Neomed, which was obviously transformational to Bellus. What was it about that asset that you felt had a shot worth taking with the remaining cash you had?
What's really interesting and cool is that we got a mandate to go out and try to bring in a new asset. We had a good team. We had a little bit of cash left, not a ton of cash left, but we built up a good culture and a good team. And we felt that we could drive value through drug development, right? So we went out, we probably reviewed 70, 80 projects in total. We relied a lot on the Canadian ecosystem. To be frank, we didn't think that we could compete for US assets at that juncture. And the asset we found, sometimes when you see something, and we went into the first meeting with, the Neomed Institute. It's now known as Admare. It's a not-for-profit set across Canada. And they took us through a bunch of their different projects. And the last one they presented was this cough program that was extremely interesting. And what we loved, high unmet medical need. There was no drug currently approved. However, there was a drug ahead of us, a drug by Merck that had shown interesting efficacy in treating cough. It was reducing cough in these patients. It was targeting the same receptor as the Neomed drug. It was also causing 80% of patients to lose their taste. And what Neomed had was a much more selective drug that was hitting the cough receptor and not the taste receptor. And we could see that differentiation in the animal. We did not know if it was going to translate into the human, but we felt that we could be essentially kind of like a fast follower. So like be behind Merck, but be better than them. It's kind of like be best in class for a very large market opportunity. There were also very few people working in cough at that time. So we thought that we could establish ourselves as leaders in that field, and that we could learn it and be great drug developers there.
And so you negotiated a licensing agreement, obviously, for the molecule.
That's right.
And then you had to pay your own money way to get it through trials.
We had enough money to pay to bring in to license in the molecule, but within 6 months, we had to go out and raise money. And
talk to us about that process. Like, what was it like after years of failures, convincing your board and other investors to basically bet on Bellus, one more time, but in a large way again, and how'd you keep your team motivated as well?
I'm laughing right now because I got a good Dr. B story. So when we went to the board and we wanted to in-license the product, the cough drug, Dr. B says, listen, we're going to let you do this. You have the cash that you have now, but don't ask me for any more money.
And this was Dr. B, not dad. Like he never was dad to you. He was Dr. B.
In the board meetings, I refer to him as Dr. B. It seemed a little bit weird to go to like board meetings and be calling him dad in the board meetings.
You weren't asking for allowance, really. You were really not.
It was, we found a little bit kind of like an in-between with Dr. B. It seemed a little bit weird to also call him Dr. Bellini. But yeah, I was like, listen, I think this project is completely independently financeable. We will go out and find the money to do that. I probably underestimated how difficult it was going to be to do that first financing. I'm not going to lie. The first financing was a $20 million Canadian financing. And if you know something about the Bellus story, we ultimately raised probably like $600 million, like US over the course of the program. The first financing was the most difficult.
Who was that backed you?
It was a US fund that ended up coming in. They had backed the Merck project when Merck had acquired it from a kind of like another.
Those are always
US
the best
biotech.
investors because they learn the lessons from that experience and they kind of steer you the right way, hopefully with an edge.
Yeah. But what was super interesting? They didn't know us really well. And when I asked them, I was like, hey, do you want to, can we name you in the press release, to give the program some kind of like luster?
Sure, of course.
Like, hey, we're this great institutional. They were like, let's see how we do together first.
Don't drag us into the mud just yet, right?
Yeah. They're like,
I respect that.
Let's see how it goes.
That's
but
smart on their behalf.
They ended up being extremely helpful.
Well, I'd say so, because looking back, on that turnaround, it was, again, an incredible outcome. But what was, the biggest strategic decision you think you made that helped pivot Bellus into a eventual $2 billion acquisition by GSK? Obviously, securing the drug, the molecule, was a strategic bet on your part. Was there anything else, though, that you now look back on, whether it's advice that Dr. B gave you, decisions your team made to get it to that milestone that was like the unlock beyond just obviously securing the molecule in the beginning?
We've chatted about this a little bit before. When we actually in-licensed the molecule, we told the board like, oh, we'll just take it through the first big clinical trial and then we'll sell it. And then I realized really, really quickly that was a terrible idea. And so from a strategic perspective, I think what we did to say that, hey, we're going to be an independent company. We're going to completely build up our own infrastructure. We're going to completely be able to like raise the capital to take this independently forward all the way to commercialization. Like we were 100% ready, for companies to scale and scale quickly, right? To go from running some of the big steps, right? You run a phase 1 study in like 25 patients, then you run a phase 2 study in a couple hundred patients. Huge step to run a study in like 2,000 patients. Huge step to file for approval. Huge step to go out and commercialize in the US, which is your primary market. I wanted to be ready to take every single one of those steps. And we transitioned the company very effectively, which put us in a much stronger position when GSK eventually, came to see us and wanted to discuss about, acquiring the company.
Yeah. So let's talk about that sort of playbook for other biotech investors or, operators and founders. You naively told your board, I remember you saying in 2017 that you developed this chronic cough drug and sell it to big pharma, and then basically spent years trying to walk that back. What advice do you have now looking back for other maybe biotech founders saying like, building for the M&A endgame is not always the best path, but always having it in your back pocket is. So like, don't show your cards all the way up front, maybe. How would you kind of play that sort of dynamic with investors and colleagues?
I think it's all about balance, right? So I think you need to be ready to do it on your own, and you need to be able to message that to all of these kind of stakeholders around you. But you also have to say like, hey, listen, like if we get the right offer, we're going to be ready to sell if the right offer comes, and you have to trust us to know what that right offer is, and trust us to know when it's more valuable to continue moving forward and to continue using equity to generate value in the company. So I think you need to balance those two things. But I see it in a lot of meetings now where I'm on the investor side. I think too many companies come to the meeting and they're like, hey, we just need to run this one study. And then we're talking to people already and run the one study, and then someone's going to buy us or someone's going to license it for a big upfront. I think you're setting yourself up. You're raising expectations for an exit too quickly that probably has a low chance of being successful, and it's only going to put you in trouble later.
I don't want to put you into like a kind of percentage of time allocation towards like sale M&A conversations and like just true operating. But would you say like in those conversations, you would prefer a founder say, look, I'm I'm 70-80% only focused on the operating goals and milestones of this business while keeping 20, maybe 30% of my time set aside for those strategic M&A conversations. Like, how do you think about that? Because like sometimes people just are looking to sell and they sell too early. People are putting themselves in a trap of becoming a seller. You always say you want your company bought, not sold. How do you think about that balance? Because you have to have some time allocated to it.
I think you're right. So like it's about a balance. I see companies that do zero, and I don't think that that's the right thing. That's not the right playbook either. And I'll tell you the problem with that. The problem with that is that then when someone approaches you, you don't have other potential acquirers that are ready. Okay. Because like ultimately what you want to do is try to create an auction. Okay. That's not what we ended up, not the situation we ended up on having at Bellus, but I'm just saying that that's really the ultimate kind of position that you want to be in. So you do want to set aside a certain amount of time to educate and to get people to know you. And like for these like group of acquirers, I don't think it just doesn't need to be a hard sell. It needs to be a soft getting to know you sell, because I think that goes a long way ultimately down the line when you are ready to sell, or when someone approaches you with the right offer that you're like, oh, like now I want to really kind of kick off a process. You've got maybe 2, 3, 4 people that are ready to move on you at the same time, at the same juncture.
What made GSK the right buyer for you? Like, did you ever have a moment of saying no to other people earlier in the process that came around, or did nobody else come around until GSK showed up?
It's so tough. Every single entrepreneur I've met that sold their company, there's always a moment of not wanting to do it. Okay. It becomes such a big part of you.
Yeah,
right?
Of course.
Like you are intertwined with this company, and you don't want to give it up. And you all and I think that that's why we're successful, right? We're successful because like we believe in ourselves to continue creating value. We believe in ourselves that we could keep going and like keep building. And so, that's how I felt when GSK kind of approached us.
So did you and Dr. B kind of say like, hey, maybe we shouldn't really sell, but also weighing the obviously rationale of what the board and other shareholders and everyone had to obviously say? But was there that kind of like conversation of like, hey, maybe we shouldn't sell?
I think it was only internal to me.
It was only in your own head. I appreciate that.
I think Dr. B, like a good chairman, okay?
For sure.
Was like, this offer is really, really good. And
been on the other side afterwards who basically can say to you, Roberto, there is another life after this that you will enjoy and get total fulfillment out of. Don't obsess about being the total naive optimist forever about this one asset.
And that's the thing, particularly in biotech, you can go to zero.
Right.
So fast. You could be worth like 2 billion and then zero. You have like one person in your trial that has a safety issue, or a couple of people that have safety issues, and boom, you're done. Or you could run the phase 3 trial and it's negative. You could have a great phase 2, high chance of success. The probability of success in phase 3 is 60 to 65%. That's not high. You know what I mean? So I think that, ultimately kind of like the rational part kind of like kicks in, and the premiums that pharma companies pay are not small. We got up like over 100% premium on our stock price. Like the general premiums that you see, like for our stage companies, probably like 70 to 100%. You need to be really, really confident that the equity that you're putting in is going to generate that kind of return for shareholders. So
that's real opportunity cost that you have to weigh, of course.
It puts boards in a very, very difficult position to not say no. And that's why we have the great companies mostly get bought. There are very, very few of them that kind of like go all the way to commercial and kind of like turn into like bigger biotechs that are fully integrated. And
I remember the time of like Vertex Pharmaceuticals, right?
Yeah. Vertex, great example. Yeah.
Well, what do you think the most important thing biotech founders should have ready, I guess, operationally or mentally, when a buyer like GSK comes calling?
I think you need to have poise. It's a big moment, and I think that you need to see yourself as an equal to the other party and as having something really, really valuable, right? And knowing where you sit versus the person on the other side of the negotiation. It's probably one of the most important negotiations you're ever going to go through. A 10, 20, 30% difference in purchase price has a really, really big, really big impact. And I think that you need to recognize who you are as a person, right? So I had a M&A advisor on the deal. It was Eric Toka at Centerview. Fantastic. They do like
fantastic
90%,
sure.
if not more, of the kind of like biotech sell side M&A. And he told me, he's like, listen, do you want me to negotiate the deal for you? Like, do you want me to do this for you? Or do you feel comfortable enough negotiating directly and doing the direct negotiation? And I was like, listen, I want to do it. I think I can do it. Like, you can coach me. We're going to go through this together, step by step. You tell me what I need to say. I'm going to tell you what they say. We're going to like work through this. And I'm not saying I did a perfect kind of like 10 on 10 job, but I wanted to do it myself. And I think it was an incredible experience to negotiate that. So, but some people might say like, hey, that's not for me, right? Like, I don't feel comfortable doing that directly myself. And maybe I should let someone else kind of take the lead, and I'm going to be in the background making the decisions, right? So I think knowing yourself is also really important.
I love that you shared that, because we've had a lot of founders who've had buyers approach them, and behind closed doors, to me, they're very giddy. They're very excited. The numbers start flowing through their head. But that's the worst time to be in a position to negotiate, because your poker face is already on your face, right? And so first things first is hire a great M&A advisor. We highly recommend that for all of our founders. Number two is be prepared to have conversations that you've never had before, and you need a coach to coach you through those. That, ability to be able to negotiate in front of somebody while putting that like little thing on your shoulder, telling you like, sell behind you in that negotiation is a really hard skill. How do you think you were coached well? Like, what advice did you get from Centerview to have during those tough conversations to negotiate that you would not have been able to figure out on your own?
It gives you more confidence and more intelligence. And what I mean by intelligence, I mean like they just tell you, hey, I've seen this buyer act before. This is what they do. They're going to start here. And then with this buyer, you could probably push them here. With this, like if it's a different buyer, if it was this guy, like, listen, like where they're at, you might move them 5%. Like, and all of a sudden you feel like, oh, like, okay, I understand the situation. I know, and I have the information to be able to like take these positions. And then you want to negotiate from strength. You want to say like, hey, I can do this on my own. And it needs to be true. I've got the money. I've got the team. I can do this. So if you want to buy it, you got to pay up, right?
Love it.
So I think that those are the kinds of things that help you in those negotiations. I do think it's a little bit of a puppet show sometimes.
Totally. But they've seen this playbook before. Yeah. They know how the characters act in the movie, and this is your first time stepping up to bat. And so like, it's better to have that information, even if it is a little bit of a puppet show, than not having it at all and just be thrown into the lion's den with like the most professional, M&A buyer ever. That's what I always say. It's like you're going up against like, the biggest private equity firm that's done hundreds, thousands of these. They're going to eat you up for lunch, right? This is like a cakewalk for them. Yeah. So you got to be prepared.
I'm laughing. I got an interesting story about how this, and this is all in the public domain. You kind of see like the prices, the kind of like the different levels that GSK was willing to pay. Mm-hmm. I think, and I don't remember exactly, but I think their first offer was like at 11 something, and we'd gotten them up to 14.50, and only like just essentially negotiating against themselves. Okay. Just telling them like, we want more. And then at that juncture, we kind of went to the board. We said, hey, we're ready to engage. And we were going to make a counter offer. And I think this was me. I misread kind of like the situation. And I was like, I think they've got a lot more to go. And we told them like, hey, you could buy the company at 16.50. And they balked. And they were like, hey, we're not doing this deal. And then all of a sudden, something that had been going like puppet dance like so perfectly was like, oh shit, like we might lose this deal. and I think from there we kind of found a way, like there was a pause, and we found a way to kind of like reconnect. And it's incredible how small things can make all the difference. GSK came back and upped their price to $14.75, 25 cents. Kind of meaningless. But I can tell you, if they had stayed at $14.50, we probably wouldn't have done the deal. Just because of the dynamic of how the deal had kind of like come together and how the negotiation had gone. So and then we said, yes.
Yeah, done. Yeah. What was the small thing that you thought brought it back around? Like, what was the little thing that helped bring the conversation alive again?
It was a little bit of back channeling, through the M&A advisors. And then kind of, kind of like through the leads again, kind of like hitting a more mellow tone.
Love it. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing it. I want to move on to sort of your role now at, BSQUARED with your brother and what you guys are trying to do to kind of change the biotech industry from an investor standpoint in Canada. Canada has struggled to basically build enduring biotech giants that can really scale globally. Can I get a sense of why you think that is and what we need to do to change that in order to build like the Gilead of the North?
I know I'm on the record 10 years ago that kind of like in a Globe and Mail article where I said like, there's going to be a fully integrated biotech company in Canada within 10 years, Gilead of the North. And we're 10 years later and we still don't have that Gilead of the North. So I'm happy to chat about that. I think the first thing I want to say is that we have a lot of things going really well in the biotech in Canada. I think we do amazing science. I think we do, I think we also do good translational science that can be applied. We create great companies. I think there's a really good VC network in Canada. Like we have good people that are doing great work, like investing in the right companies. I think we have like a small but growing group of entrepreneurs that are ambitious and that want to build companies. I think that my number one thing is we just need way more of it, right? Like we need more of everything. Like we need the venture community to have more capital to deploy. We need to build more entrepreneurs. We need to encourage even more translational science in our academic institutions. Like we need to create this flywheel, like this virtuous cycle that keeps building and building and building, getting more and more shots on net. Because I think ultimately you need 10 Belluses, 15 Belluses to get one that goes all the way for a variety of reasons, right? But you need 10, 15 of these companies at that level to have one that goes commercial and that creates this integrated kind of biotech company that's based here.
And you think the gap really lies in the late stage capital part that we don't have here? Obviously Canada punches above its weight in the innovation side. We've got a great ecosystem in Quebec, in British Columbia, in Toronto, in Canada. Like we have good innovation. I think you would agree.
100% agree on the innovation. Would I love to see like we talk about this now, it's in the news a lot. Would I love to see the pension funds kind of get involved in biotech and healthcare again? Yeah, I'd love that. I mean, like they do in the US, right? And they would have more capital to be able to kind of become.
Do you think it's because of the risk tolerance that they have sort of been positioned as trying to just hit their internal numbers on an IRR basis, and therefore biotech is just not that for them? I don't agree with it, but like Quebec has done a fantastic job on the investment side through their pension funds and government-owned vehicles. The rest of the Magate have not, or Maple Aid, I mean. And I think that is going to change. I hope. It sounds like it's starting to have ripples across the environment. But when you talk about late stage capital, is that locally you're talking about or globally, like bringing global capital into the Canadian late stage biotech ventures?
I think we have great projects get funded by US investors. Okay. So like Bellus shareholder base was like outside of the Bellini family office was probably like, it's like 95% US. Okay. That's some Europeans in there. So once you're at a certain level, you can attract that foreign capital. But I do think that if you want to build out an ecosystem, and I'm not saying, these institutional investors shouldn't invest in biotech globally. They can do that globally. But I think having the ability to have large local investors be able to write big checks for the for the local biotech companies as well, that would be fantastic. So I don't know what it is exactly. So like I don't want to say that I'm an expert around this. I think that it's a little bit foreign for them. And it's not part of their kind of like strategic mandate right now, because a lot of other things are great in biotech, generate amazing returns.
Absolutely.
Help build out the kind of like local ecosystem and create big companies here in Canada as well. So I think it has a lot of the pieces that would make it a very, very attractive kind of area. I think you could also deploy one of the things is like, we can't deploy big amounts. I think you can deploy big amounts, big check sizes into biotech companies. So I don't know exactly what it is, but I'm happy to engage and educate.
No, it's a good conversation. I think there definitely could be some policy incentives that, we can see put together also to incentivize people to invest, at that stage. Being listed, obviously, in the US helped you guys a lot at Bellus, attract a ton of investor demand. Do you think there's a problem with the Canadian public markets in the ways in which it brings capital into these, biotech companies?
I mean, the game plan right now, and this is for almost like every single biotech company in the world of, a certain kind of quality, is to direct list on NASDAQ. Like that's just how it is, whether you're a European company, whether you're a Canadian company, US company. And so
at what stage can you do that?
So that varies. Like we kind of go through cycles where it could be kind of like platform earlier stage companies. Right now, we're kind of like on the tail end of a window that's, that like of a non-existing IPO biotech window, but that is starting to creep open. I think that there's a lot of IPOs that are likely lined up for later this year and into the beginning of next year. So we're going to start testing that out. But a lot of those companies are going to be later stage.
Right.
So they're going to be companies that have data in patients already. So they've run already clinical trials. So, you're going to start with the less risky companies at the beginning of these windows. But if they're listed on NASDAQ, like that's just not a reason for, Canadian investors not to invest in those companies and in those projects. Like they do that all the time for lots of companies, right?
Yeah. I mean, you've been around biotech long enough. You've seen multiple cycles. It's a pretty exciting time, even for us at the very earliest stages of investing. Our last few deals have been in biotech. You've seen them. Like this is not an area that we are usually focused on, but in the convergence of AI and software and drug discovery and large models, it's getting really exciting for investors like us even to be involved in this space. What are you most excited about? Like what upcoming trends are you seeing in the therapeutic space that is getting you excited over the next few years?
I'm probably such a traditional kind of like biotech drug developer and now investor. Like my background is in like small molecules, so like like pills. We tend to do a little bit like lower risk stuff like kind of like what I did at Bellus, where we're like fast following, so a little bit more de-risked biology. That's mostly because I'm starting out as an investor, right? So this is an early phase. We want to do a little bit like lower risk, but we're spending a lot of time trying to think about where the puck is going to go. Right. And I think that's a really, really exciting area. We have so many interesting new modalities of giving drugs. If you think about things like, cell therapy or gene therapy, I think we got to work out some of the kinks around those modalities in terms of kind of like cost of goods, payers kind of like pay for these drugs. Like if you think about gene editing, where something that you only take once, that you only take one drug once that cures you for your life. What's the cost of that, right? Like what's the value of that also? So I think that those are really, really exciting areas. And I do think we're also spending time thinking about this overlapping area between drug development and technology and AI in particular. And I think we're starting to see some of the fruits of that. Some companies get going. I think it's still very early days, but the promise of it, or the hope, is that, you take a step back. The big issue with drug development and biotech and pharma is the failure rate. The failure rate's too high, right? And the cost of developing drugs is enormous, right? A lot of people that don't know the industry, when I start talking to them about it, they're like, drugs cost so much. Why is that? And I'm like, it's because you're not just paying for that one drug, you're paying for all the failures. And if you think about kind of like at an early stage, projects have maybe like 1% chance of being successful, even less than that, if you're at a discovery phase. the hope of technology is that if we can move that 1% to 2 or 3 or 4%, it's going to have a huge impact. I think there are so many interesting areas to be thinking about, kind of like moving that needle.
So does that mean you get excited about the drug discovery portion of where we're at now in the cycle with AI? Or does that mean that you just will hopefully see more things from the discovery side move through the funnel to where B-Squared gets involved in funding them that have become more de-risked with less capital required, so that when they do go to potential clinical trials, they have a higher chance of success?
Yeah, I think right now we're more on the latter side. We see this as a lot of more tools that are going to accelerate our clinical development. And we see ourselves as experts in clinical development specifically. And so we want to know what those tools look like, and we want to know those companies, and we want to be able to share that with the companies that we're thinking about investing in. So that's where it's going to start. We are a family office. So like we, do not have kind of like hard set criteria around what we have to invest in. So would it be, crazy for us at some juncture in the future to kind of like think about investing in a technology? I don't think so. I think we could possibly do that. But at our core, we're drug developers. But I want to give you an example. At Bellus, we were looking at, our drug was formulated twice a day. And we wanted to find a formulation. So kind of like put the drug and encapsulate it in a way so that it could be given to patients once a day, right? To do that, we put together kind of like a $20 million plan to kind of like flush that out. I recently met a company actually based in Toronto, and they do a lot of that work to think about formulating your drug and changing the formulation using AI to give you a much higher chance of being successful and to do it at a much lower cost. That's incredibly exciting and interesting for a drug developer. So you take that 20 million and take it down to like 4 or 5 million. Like, that's amazing. And that's going to like, eventually that helps compliance for patients, right? So something like that, I think is, some of the low hanging fruit, where you're seeing the convergence of biotech and AI.
Yeah, there's huge gains in optimization and efficiency across the entire supply chain of creating drugs, basically, is what you're saying, that we will definitely hopefully get to the bottom of in the next few years. You're Gen 2 now, running a family office with your brother. What have been the biggest challenges and lessons you've learned in setting up and managing a family office different from being an operator of a traditional business?
I think the challenges are also what makes it exciting, right? So we're kind of like, we're doing something new. And so we're learning the ropes around a number of different areas. And I think that we're trying to apply our own perspective on it, right? So I think that we don't pretend to be investors that have been investing for 25 years and that do things the way those types of investors do, or that we have that exact kind of experience. At this juncture, we're not leading rounds, we're not pricing rounds, because we don't feel comfortable setting those numbers. But we do have a lot of operational experience. So we want to participate in financing rounds where there are other investors that do those roles, but where we can provide our own value and our own expertise. And we can tell them like, hey, when we look at this plan, I would think about maybe adding more patients to this clinical study for XYZ reason. Or maybe you could think about doing it in these geographies that might be quicker, or doing it in this other way. Or you should probably be thinking about hiring these people earlier in your plan. Like, these are all the kind of like insights that we think that we bring to the table, that we can work with management teams and kind of like give them a heads up of like what their 2-year plan, where the challenges are going to be in their 2-year plan. So ultimately that, I think it's a complementary piece to, kind of like a well-balanced syndicate.
Do you ever get the itch to go back and build something again?
One of the things I really wanted to figure out in becoming an investor is, there were 2 things. One, like, are we good at this? Can we actually generate returns? And I think we're doing okay on that so far. But the other is like, am I passionate about it? Like, do I find it makes me feel good at the end of the day, rewarding, right? And I'd say so far, yes. I do miss it. I do miss being closer, and like, you're just building a team. You're close to those teammates, you're kind of like really doing active drug development. But it's been an incredible journey so far, learning about all these different therapeutic areas, meeting so many different teams, these new modalities. And it does allow you like a much wider breadth of creativity, which I find really, really cool.
Yeah. When I get asked this question, I don't say like, do I follow my passion towards, early stage investing? Of course, I'm passionate about it. But if it's not matched with effort and the effort you have to put into this role every day, then you should not be doing it. So as long as you're putting in the effort to continue to progress and learn and challenge yourself, then you're doing something right. And of course, if you enjoy the process, that's important as well. But I also do love that kind of ability to switch gears constantly and see so many different projects all the time instead of focusing on one solo one. Sometimes it's good from, an ADHD perspective to get distracted by something else, or when things are not going well in one area, it will pass and the good things will come around in the next, conversation you have. So I do love that variability as well of it.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Well, before we wrap things up, we always ask our guests for their fast favorites. So Roberto, we're going to ask you for your first favorite podcast.
I do love a good hardcore history.
The best,
so
Dan Carlin.
Dan Carlin's such a great storyteller.
His voice is unbelievable.
He wraps you in. And I've started listening to it with the kids a little bit too. And
you're listening to World War I with your kids.
I think we did the Roman Empire together. Yeah, it can be a little bit gruesome at times. I got you, and I have an 8 and 10-year-old, but I think they like it. I like it.
I love it. I really appreciate that. That's good. Next is your favorite newsletter or blog.
I mean, on the biotech side, I do love Adam Feuerstein. I know he can be controversial at times, but it's kind of like, where's the drama in biotech right now? So it's less than just kind of like news, but like what's happening? Why do people not like this company? What's going on? Who's in a fight with who? Which is super, super fun to read about.
That's statnews.com. Is that his web blog?
Yeah, it's on Stat News. He's one of the writers for Stat News. Yeah.
Nice. Next is your favorite tech gadget.
I did buy my kids Switch 2.
You bought it for yourself. Come on, be honest.
I'm not going to lie. I really, really enjoy playing Mario Kart and Mario Tennis with the kids.
I love it. When they go to school, you're just like huddling over the thing, just playing all the time. I love it.
And it's relaxing at night too. I'm with you.
Yeah, I should get one. My kids are still young. My wife would definitely want them playing games right now. But as they get older, like your kids, I would definitely want to start getting back into Mario Kart with them. I was explaining to my daughter when she was wearing like a Mario Brothers character shirt, she had like Yoshi and Bowser and all them on her. She had no idea who they were, but I'm like, oh, when you get to see these characters in action, dropping bananas, it's going to be fun. Favorite new trend?
I'm really into padel right now. I think I told you previously, I was a tennis player for many, many years and then had some back issues. And I've picked up this half tennis, half squash game that's starting in North America, but not really taken over. It's big in Europe and big in South America.
Yeah, it's huge. I'm looking forward to getting into it too. Once I rebound, I think it's going to be a great sport to get into. I don't like pickleball, to be honest, as much. I think padel is the right sport for someone who wants to be active, good intensity, but also some not as intense as like a long game of tennis.
With you.
Next is your favorite book.
I'm not going to pretend like I'm a ginormous, huge reader. But I kind of on the business side, I've gone through a couple of phases. Like when I first became a CEO, I read Good to Great and The Outsiders and a couple of those books. And then I didn't really do a lot of business books again until more recently after the exit. I was like, I should read a little bit about, kind of like the VC side of things, and read, The Hard Thing About Hard Things and 0 to 1 and love those. So kind of super traditional, but I want to say I do love a good, just feel good book. I'm into, I read Tomorrow, which is about a video game designer. Super cool. I read Pachinko, which South Korean immigrant family. I do want to give one plug to my brother-in-law. He wrote a book. It's called The Battle of Ice and Ink. Super cool. It's a book about kind of the two explorers in the early 1900s that were going to the North Pole, but at the same time, kind of like the media empires that were backing them individually, like to generate stories for them and to sell newspapers. So the New York Times and the Herald. And it's a really great mix of kind of like sports and business. So I love that one.
Wow, your brother-in-law, Daryl Hartman?
Yeah, that's right.
That's an incredible book. I've heard about that. Like, why is that not a movie or a TV show?
Let's make it happen.
It's a fascinating,
I love that.
fascinating story. You got to get in on that. Not to become a film investor, but that is an incredible book. Cool. And last but not least, is your favorite life lesson?
I think just go for it. You know, like don't hold back. Be yourself. You know, it took me a little bit of time to kind of like really realize that in my own kind of like professional development, but also personal development. And I think that we have all these models out there and you can draw in from those models, but ultimately like you have to find your own path.
I'm going to ask you just, you know, because I'm so interested in terms of like some of the best advice Dr. B ever gave you, whether personal or professional, that you still reflect on today.
I think the best thing he did for me was instill risk taking. It's not really part of me. Like I was a very like just more conservative kind of kid growing up. And I think a lot of people say that that's like, it's inside of you. I learned that. It kind of grew on me as I kind of developed. And he was a big part of that. But he would say, you want to hear a funny story? He would say, you should spend your money. Spend your money. Don't save your money. Spend your money. It's going to make you want to go out and make more money.
I love that. There's nothing make you work harder than a mortgage payment.
That's for sure.
Well, yeah, it's funny because I got advice that someone said to me when I was younger, saying, when you're younger, you have nothing to lose and everything to gain. So take the risk. When you're older, you have a lot more to lose. You've got family dependents. You've got all the responsibilities. You've got employees. When you're young, you've got nothing to lose, but a lot to gain if it works. And that's such great advice. Well, I appreciate you sharing that and all the things you did and learned from Dr. B and your experience building Bellus. Thanks so much for joining us in the tank today with Roberto Bellini from B2 Capital.
Thank you, Matt.